Welcome to This Week in the Warner Archive Collection, where we discuss our newest releases. I'm George Feltenstein, and I'm proud to be joined by my colleagues Matt Patterson and D.W. Ferranti. March comes in like a lion, and March is a very special month for the Warner Archive Collection. For this March 23rd marks our 12th anniversary, and we have great new additions to the Warner Archive Collection, starting with a bunch of blues. Some great stuff on Blu-ray. Isle of the Dead, from the master of dark noir horror from RKO in the 1940s, Val Lewton. Boris Karloff stars in Isle of the Dead from 1945. Then we jump ahead 3 decades to a film that aired on ABC television in the United States, but was shown in theaters internationally. And this is a fan favorite we brought to DVD many years ago, and now have remastered for Blu-ray with an exciting commentary and 2 aspect ratios, no less. The Bermuda Depths from 1978, starring the lovely Connie Selica. This is a real treat because a lot of fans have been very excited about this release. The next Blu-ray is a more classically oriented Blu-ray. It is The Great Caruso from 1951, MGM's biggest box office hit of the year that year, and they had some pretty big titles. Mario Lanza stars as the famous opera singer in this biography, and it's been restored and remastered. 4K scan off the original Technicolor negatives. Looks amazing. And continuing the Songfest, we have 1958's Damn Yankees with Gwen, Verton, and Tab Hunter. We brought it to you on DVD last year, but we've been remastering and have a new 4K scan from preservation separation elements, and have created a beautiful new master of this Broadway show that was beautifully filmed by Stanley Donen and George Abbott. New to TV animation on Blu-ray, we have another Warner Archive favorite that's been one of our biggest sellers on DVD, now coming immaculately to Blu-ray. Thundar the Barbarian, the complete series. And contemporary television fans are not left out of the deal this new release month, because we've got Animal Kingdom, the complete 4th season. And this was a very exciting season that I'm anxious to discuss with the gentlemen. And then last but not least, we've got 2 titles back in print that are really worthy of joining the Whack Pack. First, we have Peter Bogdanovich's brilliant, timeless comedy classic, What's Up, Doc, from 1972, starring Barbra Streisand, Ryan O'Neal, Madeline Kahn in her film debut, introducing Madeline Kahn, the titles say. And then last but not least, the Best Picture of 1989, according to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, Driving Miss Daisy, starring the beautiful Jessica Tandy and the amazing Morgan Freeman. So that's the lineup to discuss, and a diverse, wonderful group of titles they are. So let's get ready for a perfect film to discuss during a pandemic, Isle of the Dead. Excuse me, gentlemen opine.
Dan, let's just get this out of the way because I know I'm going to pronounce it wrong. Vorvolaka?
Close enough. Let me tell you, there's a whole story behind that name that actually goes back some time, which we'll leave alone. But
because this is the monster, and that in the pantheon of monsters, going forward, that is not a name that rolls off the tongue.
Oh, don't be a Greekist. Also, the monster on Isle of the Dead is fanaticism and duty.
Yes. Well, but isn't that just a vampire by any other name? And it's sort of very unique time and place that it exists. Like, Dan, this is, people don't really talk about the Balkan Wars very often, except to say, use the terms balkanization or to express confusion, and which makes for a wonderful setting for a horror film, because it's nobody really knows what's going on. Except that the ancient horrors may have arisen. But what are those ancient horrors?
what's really interesting about Isle of the Dead, among many things, is that Val Lewton's approach to the director and the writer with Arnold Beckling's painting Isle of the Dead and said, make a movie based on this. And this, I want to say two things, and then I'm going to kick to George for a quick technical. This is one of my very favorite Boris Karloff movies. He is really fantastic in it. And it couldn't be timelier since it's about plague and quarantine. Oh. But Boris Karloff is the lead, and he plays a general who's trying to lead his people to independence, and he's so dedicated to his cause that he will allow nothing to stand in the way of the fight for independence and his army. So when people on this island are exposed to a plague, he forces them all to stay on the island on penalty of death for fear of infecting the army. And while they're stuck on this island, stress and mania take their toll. This is kind of like also Lewton's Ghost Ship, only the lead is much more sympathetic in the end.
Karloff's style, his attitude, his very embodiment, brings that, he brings that gravitas to this that you can't help but get kind of lost in this world with him.
George, this film, in addition to being a great Val Lewton film, is, and we should mention, it was directed by Mark Robson. It looks fantastic.
Previously, when on DVD, what you saw and what we released on DVD years ago was from a fourth generation element, and it looked, I'll just be kind, it didn't look very good. It didn't sound very good. This is a 4K scan off the original camera negative, full restoration, meticulously done, full audio restoration. This is a really pristine presentation of a Val Lewton movie that people have really, really been wanting. And to add to it, we have Dr. Steve Haberman, film historian and author, providing a supreme commentary. I've always liked this movie so much.
In terms of the presentation, we were able to scan this from an original nitrate, which doesn't happen a lot with the RKO stuff.
Right, it's catch as catch can. RKO's prior owner occasionally would melt down original negatives for their silver content. The original negative survived on this, and it was our great pleasure as part of the studio's ongoing preservation efforts to create a new 4K scan off the original camera negative for protection and create this new HD master for this Blu-ray that's really top notch. And we were even able to find, which is very rare when it comes to RKO, a trailer. Now, this trailer happens to be from a 35mm element. It looks pretty good. It's a new HD master of the trailer. But along with it comes Spanish subtitles. It's English, but it has Spanish subtitles printed in to the trailer negative. I was so excited that we finally had a trailer because we probably have talked about this before, but unlike Warner Brothers and MGM, RKO as well as Monogram and other smaller studios didn't have their own trailer departments. And as a result, when we got the RKO library, we didn't get any trailers with it. The trailers were made by National Screen Service for RKO, as was done for many other studios, because they didn't have their own in-house trailer department. So anytime you see a trailer pop in on an RKO movie, unless it was made in the late 50s before the studio's demise, usually that trailer has come from a collector, or occasionally we've been able to find something somewhere. This was hiding in the inventory, and it was the Spanish subtitles that probably kept anyone from using it. But we have a history of using Spanish subtitles on our trailers. Remember what we did for Red Dust. So it just adds a little extra zing to a fine presentation of a really terrific movie. And I'm so deeply grateful that I know the Lewton fans really want more of his films on Blu-ray, and we hear their call, and we're delighted to be able to bring them to them. So this is a very, very exciting group of films to talk about. Moving forward, we have, I thought it would be appropriate that the next film we discuss jump ahead quite significantly. And it's more than a movie. It's both a telefilm, if you saw it on ABC in the late 70s, and a theatrical release if you saw it internationally in the late 70s. And this has been a bestseller for us on DVD for over a decade at the Warner Archive, but now a 4K scan again off the original camera negative brought new luster and beauty never thought possible to the Bermuda Depths, as beautiful as the lovely Connie Selica herself. And this disc has the film in both the television aspect ratio of 1.33 and the theatrical aspect ratio of 1.85. So you get your choice of how you want to look at it. But either way you look at it, it looks frankly amazing. I couldn't believe how great this film looked. And this film was produced by the team of Arthur Rankin and Jules Bass, best known for their puppet animation television specials such as Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Frosty the Snowman. And then they went on to animation that was traditional animation. And then they moved on to live action features, only a few. And we have a bunch of them in our library since we have the Rankin Bass content post-1974. And the Bermuda Depths has been a much requested title for Blu-ray. And when we announced it, people couldn't believe that we were doing it. But we do what people don't think we're going to do. And it's all due to that wonderful monkey.
Yep. It's so good that the monkey threw the dart at a giant turtle, which is the, sort of the Rankin Bass signature, especially for their live action, is that, they'll have a monster. And this monster is, so this is another island, a fantasy island. And it is
island horror.
Yeah. Like these two films really kind of go together more than you'd think.
And they both involve fear of beautiful women.
Yeah, but this one, I think the song is a little better. Just my opinion. And the island of Bermuda is not actually in many films from this period, but Rankin himself really liked it as a vacation destination, and so decided to create a movie around its beautiful beaches. And this is what we get. And also, I'd just like to point out there's a great audio commentary on it from Amanda Reyes, who is made-for-TV Mayhem, and the Kinder Trauma co-founder Lance Vaughn. Lance and Amanda, they have so much information about this film that they talk incredibly fast and pack it with detail, end to end. Everything that I know pretty much about this film, it was, like 4 drops in a bucket compared to the info dump that's in there. And it's a fascinating story behind the scenes, and the history of TV movies and where this fits into that history, and how these films were also distributed internationally, which is why there are 2 versions on here. You really just couldn't ask for anything more from a movie which, a lot of people may have forgotten, but it was seen by millions of people in the 70s when it came out.
It made its debut in January of 1978 on the ABC Friday Night Movie. I could have done my best Ernie Anderson imitation because
Right.
he was the ABC announcer at that time. And if you can get your hands on it, there's a wonderful uh, tape circling through illicit manner of Ernie Anderson in the recording studio. Some editor got a hold of all of his recording sessions, and he was very free to use colorful language in those sessions. And I think I never laughed so hard as the first time I heard the Ernie Anderson compilation. But I don't want to take things away from the Bermuda Depths because, you know, there was a real fascination with the Bermuda Triangle in the 70s.
Yeah, there was a whole subgenre of TV horror movies that were all centered around the Bermuda Triangle, the Bermuda Depths, the Devil's Triangle, and they were all sort of occurring on this intersection, more of the supernatural than like aliens and time space riffs, although there was some of that too. But Bermuda Depths is a really interesting film because it's much more of a phantasmagoria than a horror film, although it does have those elements and it does have a giant monster turtle, but it's also it's the story of a young man, Magnus, played by Lee McCluskey, who returns to Bermuda where his marine biologist father was killed in a disaster that may or may not be natural. It might be a supernatural disaster, and he reunites with a marine biologist played by Burl Ives and his grad student played by Carl Weathers. But he also reunites with a young woman, Jenny, played by a very young Connie Selica. And Jenny might have a tie with this turtle, and Jenny might not be alive.
Jenny might be, let's just say there might be a clutch of eggs somewhere on the beach that is of super, well, not super, well, you know, like, Dan, that's funny because you said it right. It's like, it's not a monster movie, it's not supernatural, it's not psychic, but it is somewhere in that very in search of TV show middle ground.
Yeah,
where
I would love to see how they responded to the movie in its international release, especially in places in Europe like Spain and Italy, because it's much more their style of dark fantasy than ours.
That's a very good point.
This film actually, what's interesting is that the international version was 8 minutes shorter, and it ran 90 minutes. And this was actually a co-production between a Japanese production company that was most famous for the Ultraman franchise, Tsuburaya Productions, and they collaborated with Rankin Bass on 3 feature films. The first of which we would love to release on Blu-ray. We released it on DVD, and I know it's a Matt Patterson favorite, and that's The Last Dinosaur.
Yes.
And we are unable to do so because we can't find the original negative. Thank you, Larimar. So, as I have a feeling it's probably in Japan. But as we do a worldwide search to try to find that element and get that film out, because dinosaurs, let's face it, dinosaurs are like diamonds, they're forever.
Yep.
But there was also the third film, The Ivory Ape. And that was made in 1980. And those were all co-productions of Tsuburaya and Rankin Bass. But on the credits, it says directed by Tom Kotani, which was really, the gentleman's last name was Kotani, but I can't possibly pronounce his first name without bastardizing it, so I'm not going to do it. But the thing that I got a kick out of was the fact that what really put Rankin Bass on the map was the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer television special, which was narrated by Burl Ives. And Burl Ives appears in this film, which was made only 14 years after Rudolph. It seems like they're, 50 years apart. But they're not. And Rudolph is still on TV every year, but the Bermuda Depths is not. And people basically hadn't been able to see the Bermuda Depths until we made it available on DVD over 10 years ago. And now they can see it as never before with the splendor directly off the original camera negative in a 4K scan. So here to the Bermuda Depths. Our next film is a completely different kind of movie. We go from being in the underwater trenches and dealing with monsters to dealing with a monstrously successful motion picture that was, I believe, MGM's biggest grosser from 1951. If it wasn't number one, it was probably number two. It was definitely up at the top there. It was The Great Caruso, the story of opera legend Enrico Caruso, and who better to play him than MGM's newest opera singing star, Mario Lanza. His leading lady is the beautiful Anne Blythe, best known for her role as Vida in Mildred Pierce, as well as other very fine performances, including our Blu-ray of Kismet, which you must pick up. But he plays her love interest. And what's really great about this film for me is I personally am not knowledgeable about opera. I personally am not an opera type guy. I appreciate it, and I don't mean to be insulting to people who are, what I'm saying is almost heresy to lots of people, because there's a world of opera lovers throughout the globe. But what this film does admirably is have opera sequences that even if you aren't an opera buff, you can enjoy them. And they did a really, really good job keeping the balance between the storytelling and a more traditional Hollywood biography. And it pretty much stays accurate to the actual truth rather than being a scenario invented to put around songs. It is very moving. It's beautifully directed by journeyman MGM director Richard Thorpe, and it's gorgeous Technicolor. Jesse Lasky, who is one of the founders of Paramount Pictures, was the producer of this film and had the rights to Caruso's life and made a deal with MGM to make the picture. And we released it on DVD in 2011 or 2012, where we spent a lot of money at the time trying to do the best we could from our best intermediate element, which was an interpositive that could not shake its purpleness. And the DVDs, we properly marketed them as remastered, but the fans were not particularly happy with the results. It was a huge seller for us, but it broke my heart that we couldn't do the right thing, which was to go back to the original camera negative, almost all of which remained intact. There are, I think, 2 reels that come from safety separations because of the tragic fire we talk about so much, but it's almost entirely from the original negative with a little bit of footage coming from the safety separations. But the Technicolor is sumptuous and the presentation is marvelous. And to balance things out, we have a wonderful documentary that we co-produced in 2006 by a filmmaker named Mark Cadell. It was done in partnership with the BBC, and it's called Mario Lanza Singing to the Gods. And Mario Lanza died at a tragically young age, and this is a wonderful tribute to his legacy and his talent. And it's a great picture. It looks and sounds magnificent. So it gets my highest. I would put 3 thumbs up if I had 3 thumbs.
Yeah, I mean, it just sadly the parallels between Caruso and Lanza in real life are. I mean, Mario Lanza was the best choice to play Caruso, and then for Mario to die so young, just like Caruso, just sort of adds to the poignancy of this film. And you also get a chance to see Mario Lanza sing Puccini, Verdi, Donizetti. I mean, regardless of your familiarity with opera, these are some of the world's great composers being sung by one of the most amazing voices of the 20th century, and it's forever.
Because you guys have both mentioned, and I just want to, really kind of hammer this point in that, in 1951, when this came out, opera was, I guess you could say like on the wane. And so, this film has been heavily identified with being so influential for, tenors, like Placido Domingo and others. This was their first exposure to opera, in sort of a popular form, because there weren't great examples of opera going out, outside the cities. And so this film is just a real cultural touch point in opera and opera's popular, culture, and which of course is obviously still around and still important. So it's just such like, this is like a silver star musical, both historically and of course for the performances, and unique because of the opera emphasis.
So we can stay in a musical tone because our next film is another knockout, another Broadway adaptation. We talked in recent podcasts, I guess probably 2 podcasts ago, we talked about The Pajama Game getting a 4K restoration and coming to HD for the very first time on Blu-ray. And the same creative team, for the most part, that was responsible for The Pajama Game a year later brought their talents together for the film version of Damn Yankees, starring Gwen Verton and Ray Walston and Tab Hunter, and in a small role, Gene Stapleton. And it's another case like The Pajama Game, where it's the entire Broadway cast with one leading player being supplanted by a movie star so they could have a movie star to promote. And in this case, the leading lady was Gwen Verton, who knocked Broadway on its ear with her fantastic performance as Lola with the famous Whatever Lola Wants. And this is a play on the Faust legend, and it's based on a book called The Year the Yankees Lost the Pennant. And it's about a Washington Senators fan of middle age who's willing to sell his soul to the devil in order to be a young, incredible ball player and bring the Washington Senators, which later became the Texas Rangers. The Washington Senators were notorious for being the worst baseball team in the American League. And the show is a huge hit. The songwriters were Jerry Ross and Richard Adler, who wrote The Pajama Game. It was directed on Broadway by George Abbott, who directed The Pajama Game. It was choreographed by Bob Fosse, who had choreographed The Pajama Game. And when the movies were made at Warner Brothers, George Abbott was joined by Stanley Donen for the direction. And so we basically have another Broadway show cinematically recreated for the screen with the essence of what made it such a big Broadway hit. And this was a picture that I really, really liked when I was a little kid, and it was on television all the time. But people have been begging for a Blu-ray of this, and it wasn't available on home video for a really long time. There had been rights issues. We did bring it back on DVD last year using a 16-year-old master, but now we have this brand new 4K scan of the safety preservation masters, and we did not go off the original negative because we tested both and found we could get the best results out of the separations, which is what we did with Curse of Frankenstein. And it really looks amazing. 1958 was a really bad year for color negative stock, so you never know what you're going to get. This looks terrific. It's got great production design, wonderful performances, wonderful songs. And aside from Gwen Verton being a legend and really a multi-Tony winner, she didn't like the way she looked on the screen, and she didn't want to appear in the movies again. From what I understand, she was offered to do the role of Sweet Charity, which she did on Broadway, in the film version, and Shirley MacLaine did the film version because she didn't like the way she looked on film. She later had a second opinion about being photographed on film as she got older, and was one of the many senior citizens in the cast of Cocoon. And she was married to Bob Fosse for many, many years. Even though they separated, they never got divorced. And she really carried on his work after his premature death. And they had a daughter, Nicole, who carries on the legacy of her parents. But Damn Yankees is a tribute to so many talents, and it's a great picture, and the Blu-ray is wonderful. The only kind of unique extra on the disc is we have an international trailer, which is very similar to the domestic trailer, but the movie was called What Lola Wants internationally because the title Damn Yankees only really resonated in the United States. But the picture was a hit and very, very popular, and we're delighted to be bringing it to Blu-ray. Gentlemen, your thoughts?
Ray Walston alone is worth watching this film for, and the rest of the film really is quite full of talent. But Walston plays Applegate, the devil character, and this is sort of the role that made Ray very famous,
without question.
And it's totally deserved. It's a perfect melding of part and person. Not that people didn't go on to also play Applegate who did good jobs, including Jerry Lewis, but yes, Ray is definitive.
This is, a classic musical that you have a Faustian bargain because, as Dan was saying, the devil is perhaps one of the greatest screen and theater characters of all time. Plus, you have crazy sports fans, and what would they do, right? You can't really go up to bat and ask for anything better than this. It's a classic, and for people of all ages, as George was saying, young and old, you can't go wrong.
Well, now we're going to go back in time again by 11 years to 1947, and we're going to go back to RKO again, where Dory Sherry was making some very progressive films that address social issues. And Crossfire has three Bob: Robert Mitchum, Robert Ryan, and Robert Young. Unfortunately, a very timely story because it deals with the horrors of anti-Semitism. This film was based on a book that dealt with prejudice and hatred toward homosexuals and the murder of a person assumed as being homosexual. That was too heavy for RKO in 1947, so they changed the character played by actor Sam Levine to a Jewish character. And he's an innocent guy who's brutally murdered at the beginning of the film. And the structure of the film is fascinating. The performances are really, really terrific. It is interesting to see Robert Young as a snarky detective, and a smart one, too. You have Robert Ryan, who is one of our favorite actors in the Warner Archive collection, giving a sensational performance. And I don't want to give away any of the plot. Everybody in this film is just terrific. It was directed by Edward Dmytryk, who was a blacklisted director. And there's a commentary on this disc from James Orsini and Alain Silver, who are both film noir experts. And it's interspersed with archival comments from Dmytryk, which really adds a lot of, no pun intended, body and soul to the commentary as you watch the movie. But you also get to see Gloria Graham and Jane Greer, both of whom are film noir phenomenon. And they're terrific in the movie. This is a very, very important film. Unfortunately, it's very, very timely today with the rise of anti-Semitism that we face all around the world, and just prejudice and hatred, unfortunately, being timeless themes. It would be lovely if they were overcome by now, but they have not been. Gentlemen opine on Crossfire. We've talked about it before when we re-released it on DVD, but now you could talk about it in a whole different way because, once again, this is a 4K scan off the original camera negative. So we have a phenomenal restoration.
If you're looking for that true chiaroscuro, black, white, and shadow, you get it in spades on Crossfire. The three Roberts are what make this movie so much fun, because the three of them all have very different acting styles, but the three of them are so professional that they absolutely meld together and it works. But you've got Robert Young playing snarky, laconic detective, and then you've got Mitchum doing the laconic thing as only Mitchum can, and then you've got Robert Ryan doing that seething rage right below the surface, and they're all really, really terrific in this, and it's a great noir.
It's terrific. And it's interesting to note, he didn't write the screenplay, but the book this film was based on was written by the great filmmaker Richard Brooks, who would later go on to make In Cold Blood and an amazing group of motion pictures.
And it was actually Robert Ryan who had met Brooks and said that he would be interested in being in this because being also a Marine really kind of heavily identified with that milieu and what kind of problems and drama that can be kind of cooked out of that scenario. And this is a post-war period where things were a little darker, and this is kind of the cauldron that what we now call film noir comes from. But the results here are just so astonishingly good, and it was nominated for many awards, Academy Awards, that there are some people sort of in a modern day who almost feel like you shouldn't call this noir because it's so good that it should be called a drama. But no, this is noir, and this is what noir can do.
And another Warner Archive DVD bestseller, makes the leap to Blu-ray with beautiful high definition, brand new masters. It's the Ruby Spears production, Thundar the Barbarian, the complete series, ran from 1980 to 82. And this is a beloved show that is 40 some odd years old and still has a very fervent fan base. It's just the fervent fan base of former 3-year-olds are now in their 40s and 50s. But this is a show you can share with your children if you are in your 40s and 50s. It holds up really well. It is one of the best-selling animated series we released on DVD back when we started releasing series that had been notoriously omitted from availability at the time. So, gentlemen, what are your thoughts about Thundar? I think you kind of like it a little bit.
This is a show that for 10-year-old me when it came out, it's probably the single greatest opening to almost any show in the history of television, because within this short amount of time, we watched the future Earth of 1994 be utterly destroyed and leave in its wake a post-apocalyptic mystery world where magic suddenly could work and super science existed side by side. And from those ruins came a hero. Dan, were you similarly affected?
Well, no, and I'll explain why. Due to our minimal and yet extreme age difference, Matthew, when you were watching Thundar on Saturday mornings, I was working in an E6 lab developing Ektachrome and Fujichrome. I was very aware of Thundar the Barbarian because I was already following the then nascent comic press, and I got to tell people there was no internet, so I'm reading the comic reader, I'm reading the buyer's guide for comics fandom, I'm reading Fantagraphics Comics Journal, I'm reading whatever I can find, and there was an enormous buzz about the show. I followed the story of the show because of the talents that were involved, because it was a Ruby Spears show, but the show came from the comic book writer Steve Gerber, who's most famous for Howard the Duck. Alex Toth did main character designs for the first season, and Jack Kirby did the rest of the machinery and the villains and the monsters, and he did a lot of work on the second season. And in addition, you've already got, between Gerber, Jack Kirby, and Alex Toth, you have the golden age through the bronze age of comic book greats. But additionally, talents that worked on the show were Mark Evanier, Marty Pasco, Roy Thomas, Buzz Dixon. I mean, there were comic book giants all worked on the show, and when you watch it,
it was so different than anything I had seen, but I understood where it was coming from, from shows and comic books that, had come before it. Obviously, there's a very, a Star Wars influence. There's a sun sword, that's a lot like a lightsaber. There's a Wookiee that's not a Wookiee.
The Mock.
Ookla. But when you put them together, it was just so unlike everything else. And, kind of like when we were talking about Bermuda Depths, it occupied this weird sort of psychedelic, I guess, for kids, like this late 70s, early 80s psycho-spiritual realm that felt like a kid's dream.
And it comes with a featurette on the making of Thundar called Lords of Light, the story of Thundar the Barbarian.
And when you look at it, you'll be kind of shocked at how great it looks, because these were not high budget productions. They were Saturday morning cartoons, so they didn't even have the enhanced budgets of shows like Johnny Quest.
Right.
But they look really, really good. The high definition really brings out the lustrous colors, and it gives it a punch. I'm just delighted how these turned out. It's really terrific. Now we move from animated television of 40 years ago to live action television from just last year. And this is Animal Kingdom, the complete 4th season. and will be releasing it on DVD just as the 5th season starts telling its stories on the TNT network. Gentlemen, what did you think of Animal Kingdom Season 4 and the changes it brought?
We're moving like straight into hyper Shakespearean crime territory, and just when you think a certain character couldn't be more evil, she shows you, oh no, you have no idea what I can do. I can do it all. I'm, of course, referring to Smurf Cody, played by Alan Barkin, who's great in this film. But I found that the really compelling storyline for me in the 4th season is watching Finn Cole's performance as Jay, where Jay embraces his destiny just like Anakin Skywalker did.
This show, as it goes from season to season, you're like, how can they top it? And well, the answer is they do. It reminds me a bit of Shameless, like for these multi-generation, multi-season dysfunctional family shows. Like, I'm like, oh, my family, thank God, is so simple compared to all of this. That's all I can think when I watch it. Like, what a gift that I do not have families like this. I can go to sleep at night and fall asleep without something horrible happening.
Well, this show is on DVD, and you're not barking up the wrong tree when you say that.
Well, that pun is a perfect lead-in to talking about the two back-end prints, starting with Bogdanovich's amazing What's Up, Doc?
This is a film that I remember seeing as a child and just being over the moon about. I loved it so much, and I think it is just fantastic.
I totally dragged my feet. I mean, I think I was like 7 or 8, and I was like, well, it's named after Bugs Bunny, but it's Barbra Streisand. I don't want to go. And of course, I was totally wrong. And it was not the film I was expecting. And it's sort of funny because in retrospect, I'm realizing this might have been my first screwball comedy, even though it's a pastiche screwball comedy.
That's a very funny observation. I like this Blu-ray. I love any special feature commentary with Barbra Streisand. I can put that on and listen to her because it's almost like you're watching the film with her, because each scene she has like notes and memories and stuff. I just and that is incredible fun.
And also, This is not a Barbra Streisand movie. This is an ensemble movie. This movie works because of the incredible cast on so many levels of great actors and comedians who were brilliantly directed by Bogdanovich, who is on an amazing peak, having just come off The Last Picture Show. Mm-hmm. He followed this with Paper Moon. I don't think any director has made 3 films back-to-back of such excellence. Aside from the hairstyles and some of the clothing, and the fact that the guy has to buy a clock radio in the hotel drugstore for $68.29, there is nothing dated about this movie. The humor in it and the basic dialogue and plot points are phenomenal. Barbra Streisand is brilliant as a comedian, as an actress. She fits right into the ensemble. But the real surprise here for me initially was Ryan O'Neal, how great he was playing a straight role in a wacky comedy. A lot of people thought this was Bogdanovich's homage to Bringing Up Baby, and I really don't think of it that way. But both films succeed in being offbeat and wacky, and you find 2 people who you never think would come together and fall in love do just that. But we can't talk about this movie without mentioning the film debut of Madeline Kahn, who steals the movie practically. She's fantastic in it. And she followed that up with Paper Moon and Blazing Saddles, and Young Frankenstein. It was a great time for movie making. There's also a wonderful vintage short on the disc that was produced at the time the movie came out. Classic songs in the underscore. It's just a terrific film. So we're glad to bring it back in print, as we are glad to bring back into print the film that won the Best Picture Oscar in 1989, the film adaptation of Alfred Urry's play Driving Miss Daisy, starring one of the leading lights of the stage who found screen stardom in her elder years, and that's Jessica Tandy. And I believe she's the oldest female to have won an Oscar for Best Actress. May be wrong about that. I know Christopher Plummer won a Best Actor Oscar at a later age, but I think Jessica Tandy was 80 when she won the Oscar for this film. And it's a wonderful film. It's beautifully directed by Bruce Beresford and surprisingly good in a supporting role. I say surprisingly only because it's not the kind of role you'd expect to see him in, is Dan Aykroyd playing the son of Jessica Tandy's character. And it's really, in a way, a love story between Jessica Tandy's character and her chauffeur, played by Morgan Freeman, and the way they care for each other and the way their relationship develops. It's a wonderful play. They opened it up beautifully as a motion picture, and it surprised a lot of people when it won the Oscar that year, because there were a lot of heavy hitter films up against it. But we're very fortunate to have it back in print on Blu-ray and to add it to the Warner Archive collection. So now it's time for the podcast where we get to read letters that you send us through email.
To Mr. George Feltenstein and Mr. D.W. Ferranti, I know or read that Warner Brothers has sold their 2021 movies to HBO Max to stream on their platform. What does this mean for Warner's back catalog? I am specifically inquiring about a TV Western that ran from 88 to 91 called Paradise, later renamed Guns of Paradise. It was one of many programs over the years that suffered from bad time slots, but had a loyal fan base and garnered good reviews. In 2017, Warner Brothers released season 1 on an MOD basis. Since that release, 27 years after it was canceled, the show has aired in syndication more recently on Get TV. This has brought back fans who finally remembered the show 30 years ago and has attracted new viewers who are just discovering it and love it. The show still stands up when watching today. It is growing a whole new audience, and today's audiences like having shows they can watch on their own schedule. Having DVDs available makes that easy. We want to see seasons 2 and 3 released, or possibly a special release with all 3 seasons in a single package. Is there a reason that only the first season was released? There is a market for all the seasons on DVD, and I've organized a mail-in email campaign to convince Warner Brothers to show the market exists. It may not be a blockbuster, but it's worth MOD production. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your fascinating and informative podcast.
I'll be able to answer the story of Paradise and Guns of Paradise. We released season 1, and we struggled with the condition of the masters, which were old. There were some soundtrack problems. We started on work on season 2, and we ran into a lot of other technical problems, and we put it aside. That was then. This is now. What has happened since then is the entire series has been remastered, scanned 4K off the camera negatives. I think that we will be able to release it on DVD in the future. It probably will not be in 2021, but maybe next year in 2022, because we have a lot of work to do. All the raw work is done, but we still have to put on the polish. We thank you for your interest in the show. Do we have time for one more letter?
This is from Richard. Are there plans for further seasons of Head of the Class, as well as a short-lived spinoff, Billy, on physical media DVD?
Yes to Head of the Class. Question mark about Billy. So that wraps up this week's Warner Archive Collection podcast, but fear not, we will be back. We will return with another podcast. And until that time, I'm George Feltenstein.
I'm at MR Matt Patterson.
I'm DW Ferranti for now.
Thank you for listening and look forward to the next Warner Archive podcast.